She's clearly not supposed to be in that seat. Call security. Captain Richard Barrett's voice sliced through the cockpit intercom, sharp and dismissive. His gaze narrowed on the security monitor showing gate C-42, where a young black girl in a NASA hoodie sat absorbed in her tablet headphones, clamped over her ears. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination while traveling? Share your story. And if you believe in standing up against injustice, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. In exactly 45 minutes, this pilot's career would be destroyed. But first, let's rewind to see how this shocking confrontation began. Trinity Jackson moved through Chicago O'Hare International Airport with quiet confidence, her NASA hoodie, not just a fashion statement, but armor, a declaration of belonging in spaces where few people look like her. The hoodie featured the iconic NASA worm logo, symbolizing humanity's drive to explore beyond boundaries, to venture into spaces previously thought unreachable, much like Trinity herself in the elite world of quantum physics. The noise-canceling headphones pumping classical Bach into her ears created a bubble of calm amid the chaos. Trinity had methodically checked her information Group 4, Gate C-42. Departure at 2:15 p.m. Current time 1:37 p.m. Everything precisely calculated, the way her mathematical mind preferred. This flight to San Francisco represented the culmination of years of hard work. The Lawson Institute's summer quantum physics program had accepted only 12 students nationwide, and Trinity, despite being just 17, had earned her place with a groundbreaking essay on quantum entanglement that had impressed even Dr. Emilia Rodriguez, a Nobel laureate. "You'll be fine," her mother Maya had assured her that morning. "You're more capable than most adults I know." As an FBI agent, Maya Jackson had taught her daughter to navigate spaces where others might question her belonging, a necessary skill for a young black woman in predominantly white fields. In the cockpit of Flight 1127, Captain Richard Barrett monitored the pre-boarding area with suspicious eyes. At 54, his 22 years as a commercial pilot had been preceded by 12 years in the Air Force, where rigid protocol and chain of command were sacred. The Detroit incident 7 years ago had left an indelible mark on him. A passenger with terrorist connections had been identified before boarding his flight. Though Barrett hadn't been directly involved in the identification, he'd taken the incident as personal validation of his hypervigilance. "Something about her doesn't add up," Barrett muttered, eyes fixed on Trinity. Expensive headphones, high-end tablet. Too focused. Scanning the area while pretending to be distracted. First Officer Michael Dawson glanced up briefly. At 34, he represented a new generation of pilots more attuned to changing social dynamics. "She's just a kid with headphones, Captain. Probably doesn't even realize boarding has started." Barrett's jaw tightened. "I've been flying long enough to recognize patterns, Dawson." A flicker of doubt crossed Barrett's mind. What if he was overreacting? But admitting that would mean acknowledging a potential blind spot. Something his military training had taught him was dangerous. Better to be overly cautious than to miss a threat. With this rationalization, he pushed away his momentary hesitation. "I'm going to have Teresa check her out," Barrett decided, reaching for the intercom. Boarding just started. Perfect time to intercept if something's off. Dawson focused intently on the flight management system, deliberately avoiding eye contact. He thought of his own daughter, just a few years younger than Trinity, and felt the familiar knot in his stomach, the physical manifestation of his moral conflict. Every time Barrett targeted a passenger, Dawson calculated the cost to his career and chose silence. At the gate desk, Teresa Gomez received Barrett's call with a suppressed sigh. At 42, she'd witnessed Barrett's security concerns repeatedly target minority passengers. Last month, a gate agent who had refused Barrett's similar request had been written up and transferred to a less desirable shift. With her mother's medical bills and son's college tuition looming, Teresa couldn't afford that risk. "Copy that, Captain," she responded professionally, though the words tasted bitter. As Teresa approached Trinity, her internal conflict intensified. The young girl posed no threat. Anyone could see that. Teresa gently tapped Trinity's shoulder, watching as she startled slightly and removed her headphones. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need to verify your boarding pass and ID, please." Trinity looked momentarily confused, but quickly recovered. "Oh, sure. Is something wrong?" She pulled up her mobile boarding pass and reached for her wallet. "Just a routine check," Teresa lied, examining Trinity's perfectly legitimate documentation. Everything was in order. "Thank you," Teresa said, feeling increasingly ashamed. "Your group hasn't been called yet, but it should be soon." Before Teresa could leave, her earpiece crackled with Barrett's voice. "Ask her about her destination. Get specifics." Teresa hesitated, her hand unconsciously touching the photo of her son tucked in her pocket. If she lost this job, how would she make his next tuition payment? But if she complied, what message would she be sending to her son about courage and integrity? "Where are you headed in San Francisco?" She asked the question heavy with unwanted obligation. The Lawson Institute. Trinity answered promptly. "I'm attending their summer quantum physics program. It starts tonight at 7. Her voice betrayed the first hint of anxiety, a slight tremor that revealed her growing awareness that something wasn't right. Teresa relayed this information, hoping it would satisfy Barrett. It didn't. Too rehearsed came his immediate response. "Check her bag. Say it's a random selection." By now, other passengers were noticing the extended interaction. An older white woman in a business suit frowned, watching Teresa's uncomfortable posture and Trinity's confused expression. "I'm sorry, but we're conducting random bag checks today," Teresa explained, knowing full well they were doing no such thing. "Would you mind if I take a quick look in your backpack?" Trinity's brow furrowed, but she unzipped her backpack. "Sure, I guess." Her hands trembled slightly, betraying her rising anxiety despite her composed face. The bag contained exactly what you'd expect from a teenage science prodigy. Textbooks, notebooks filled with equations, a laptop, chargers, a water bottle, and some snacks. "Thank you for your cooperation," Teresa said, her shame deepening as she walked away. The woman in the business suit approached her. "Excuse me, but was there a reason you singled out that young lady? I've been sitting here for an hour and haven't seen anyone else's bag checked." "It's just a random security procedure, ma'am. Nothing to be concerned about." "Random? Really?" The woman, Dr. Sandra Williams, a university professor, wasn't buying it. "Because it looked very specifically targeted to me, and I'm not the only one who noticed." Dr. Williams gestured to several other passengers watching with concerned expressions. A middle-aged black man in a business suit had paused his phone conversation to observe. A young white couple was whispering to each other, glancing between Trinity and Teresa with troubled looks. Trinity replaced her headphones, trying to regain her focus, but the seed of anxiety had taken root. She thought about texting her mother but hesitated. Maya was in an important operation meeting. Trinity didn't want to disturb her over what might be nothing. In the cockpit, Barrett watched the security feed, his certainty hardening despite the lack of evidence. His mind, trained to identify threats, but warped by unacknowledged bias, constructed elaborate scenarios to justify his suspicion. Would you have spoken up if you witnessed this happening? Think about it as we continue this shocking true story. Captain Richard Barrett unbuckled his seatbelt with a decisive click. "I'm going to take a closer look myself," he announced to First Officer Dawson, who glanced up in surprise. "Captain, we're due to depart in 30 minutes. The walk-around inspection can wait 5 minutes. Barrett cut him off. "This is a security matter. Log it as an extended pre-flight security assessment." Barrett straightened his uniform, adjusted his cap, and exited the cockpit with military posture. His presence in the jetway turned heads. Captains rarely left the aircraft during boarding. He moved with deliberate authority to the gate area, scanning until he spotted Trinity still absorbed in her tablet. Teresa Gomez noticed Barrett's approach with a sinking feeling. In 12 years, she had never seen him leave the aircraft to personally investigate a passenger. This was escalating beyond the usual profiling incident. "Captain Barrett." She greeted him with forced professionalism. "Is there something I can help you with?" "The situation requires my personal assessment." He stated loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. He turned toward Trinity, who remained oblivious behind her headphones. Barrett approached and stood directly in front of Trinity, his shadow falling across her tablet. When she didn't immediately look up, his suspicion deepened. He reached down and tapped forcefully on her tablet screen. Trinity jumped, startled by the intrusion, and quickly removed her headphones. Her heart began racing, a physiological response to the sudden confrontation with an authority figure. "I'm sorry, yes. I'm Captain Barrett, commanding officer of Flight 127, he announced, as if addressing a military subordinate. "I need to see your boarding pass and ID again." Trinity's expression shifted from surprise to confusion to unease in rapid succession. A flush of embarrassment crept up her neck as she became aware of passengers watching the interaction. Again, the gate agent just checked them a few minutes ago. "Now you'll show them to me," Barrett insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Trinity complied, pulling up her boarding pass and retrieving her ID once more. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying her rising anxiety despite her composed face. She noticed several passengers had stopped their conversations to watch, adding to her discomfort. Barrett examined them with exaggerated scrutiny, as if expecting to find obvious forgeries. "Trinity Jackson," he read aloud. 17 years old. His emphasis on her age carried an unmistakable implication. Too young to be traveling alone in first class. "Yes, sir," Trinity responded, maintaining her composure despite growing discomfort. "And what's your business in San Francisco?" Ms. Jackson Barrett's questioning took on an interrogative tone. "I'm attending the Lawson Institute's quantum physics program. It's a summer research opportunity for high school students." Trinity's voice remained steady, but her fingers nervously twisted the cord of her headphones, a small tell of her increasing stress. Barrett's expression remained skeptical. "That's quite an expensive program, I imagine." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. "I received a full scholarship," Trinity replied, her voice growing quieter but still steady. She swallowed hard, fighting against the pressure building behind her eyes. She would not cry. Not here. Not now. By now, several passengers had stopped to observe the interaction. Among them was Dr. Sandra Williams, the university professor who had questioned Teresa earlier. She stepped forward, unable to remain silent. "Excuse me, Captain," she interjected. "Is there some security concern I'm missing? This young lady has already been questioned by your gate agent." Barrett turned sharply. "This is an airline security matter, ma'am. I'd appreciate if you returned to your seat and avoided interfering with official procedures." Dr. Williams stood her ground. "I don't see any official procedure that involves a captain leaving his cockpit to interrogate a minor who's done nothing wrong. This looks like racial profiling to me." Her direct accusation caused several other passengers to murmur in agreement. A middle-aged black man in a business suit nodded emphatically. "I've been watching this whole thing. The girl hasn't done anything suspicious." "If you continue to interfere," Barrett responded coldly, "I'll be forced to consider whether you present a security risk to this flight as well." The threat was clear. "Challenge my authority, and you won't be flying today either." Dr. Williams' face flushed with anger. But years of navigating academic politics had taught her when tactical retreat was necessary. She took a step back, but remained within earshot, pulling out her phone and beginning to record the interaction. "I'm documenting this," she announced clearly, "for the young lady's protection." Her action emboldened others. The businessman also raised his phone, as did a young white couple nearby. Within moments, at least 5 passengers were recording the confrontation, creating a digital record that would soon prove crucial. Meanwhile, First Officer Dawson had appeared at the gate entrance, ostensibly checking something with the gate agent, but his concerned glances toward the confrontation revealed his real purpose. He approached Teresa's desk. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. Teresa kept her voice low. "He's questioning that girl for no reason. This is the 3rd time her documentation has been checked. Everything's in order." Dawson nodded slightly. "Has she done anything suspicious at all?" "Nothing." She's been sitting quietly with her headphones on, working on some advanced math from what I could see. She's going to some science program in San Francisco. Dawson took a deep breath, gathering his courage. The past 3 years of silent complicity weighed on him. Each incident where he'd witnessed Barrett's behavior and said nothing each time he'd prioritized his career over speaking up. He thought of his daughter, imagining her in Trinity's position, and something finally broke loose inside him. He approached Barrett and Trinity. "Captain," he said respectfully but firmly, "we're on a timeline for departure. Is there an actual security concern here that I should log in the flight report?" Barrett turned to his first officer, irritation flashing across his face. "I'm handling a potential security situation, Dawson. Return to the cockpit and complete the pre-flight checklist. With respect, sir. If there's a legitimate security concern, it needs to be documented and reported through proper channels." Is that what we're doing here? It was a small act of rebellion, framed within the procedures that Barrett claimed to revere. For a moment, Barrett seemed caught off guard by the challenge coming from his usually compliant first officer. "We have a passenger displaying suspicious pre-boarding behavior," Barrett stated. "I'm conducting an assessment before allowing her on my aircraft." Trinity looked between the two pilots, her scientific mind processing the dynamics at play. She noticed the first officer's subtle body language, the way he positioned himself slightly closer to her than to Barrett, a nonverbal indication of support. "Sir," she addressed Barrett directly, "I understand you're concerned about security. That's important. But I've done everything correctly. Cleared TSA, had my boarding pass verified, answered questions. I'm just trying to get to my program on time." Her voice caught slightly on the last words, revealing the emotional toll of the confrontation, despite her outward composure. The rationality of her response seemed to further aggravate Barrett rather than calm him. A teenage girl wasn't supposed to be composed and articulate when confronted by authority. "The way you're acting right now," Barrett said, the evasiveness, the prepared answers. "These are all security red flags." A ripple of disbelief went through the growing audience of passengers. Barrett was no longer making sense. The girl's crime was now that she was too composed, too reasonable. Teresa watched the situation deteriorating with growing alarm. This had moved beyond the usual uncomfortable profiling incident into something potentially explosive. Airport security protocols were clear. If the captain deemed a passenger a security threat, they could be denied boarding. But this was so obviously baseless that it might create a public relations nightmare for the airline. She thought of her son again. Not just his tuition, but the values she wanted to instill in him. What would he think if he knew his mother had stood by while a young girl was being treated unjustly? In that moment, something shifted inside Teresa. She made her decision. She picked up her phone and quickly dialed her supervisor's extension. "Elaine, we have a situation at C-42 with Captain Barrett. You might want to come down here. A passenger is being targeted without cause, and multiple witnesses are recording. This could escalate quickly." As Trinity sat surrounded by growing tension, her thoughts raced to her mother. Maya would know exactly how to handle this situation, how to diffuse it, how to stand her ground without escalation. Trinity had grown up watching her mother navigate spaces where her authority was constantly questioned because of her race and gender. Now she needed to channel some of that same strength. "Captain Barrett," she tried again, "I understand you're doing your job. Is there something specific I can clarify to address your concerns?" Even as she maintained her composed exterior, her stomach churned with anxiety. The orientation at the Lawson Institute was crucial. It was where students would be paired with research mentors, where the trajectory of the entire program would be set. Barrett seemed momentarily thrown by her continued composure. People being unfairly targeted typically became emotional, angry, fearful, or defensive, reactions he could then point to as further evidence of suspicious behavior. Trinity's calmness was disrupting his script. "Your behavior is inconsistent with typical passenger patterns," he finally stated. First Officer Dawson couldn't contain himself. "What behavior, Captain? She's sitting and waiting for her boarding group like dozens of other passengers." Barrett turned on his subordinate. "That's enough, Dawson. Your objection is noted. Return to the cockpit immediately, or face disciplinary action." Dawson hesitated, torn between professional self-preservation and moral obligation. The moment stretched weighted with significance. For 3 years, he had watched Barrett profile passengers without speaking up. For 3 years, he had prioritized his career over doing what was right. The accumulated weight of those compromises pressed on him now. "No, sir," he said quietly but firmly. "I don't believe there's any legitimate security concern here, and I cannot, in good conscience, participate in what appears to be discriminatory treatment of a passenger." A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. For a first officer to openly defy his captain was almost unprecedented. Barrett's face reddened with fury and shock. "You're relieved of duty, effective immediately," Barrett snapped. "Report to the chief pilot's office when we return." Dawson nodded once, accepting the consequence of his stand. "I'll do that, sir, but I'll also be filing a formal report about this incident." He turned to Trinity. "I apologize for what you're experiencing, Ms. Jackson. This isn't how our airline should treat passengers." With that, he walked away, not toward the cockpit, but toward the main terminal, his act of defiance complete. Several passengers broke into spontaneous applause at his moral courage, further infuriating Barrett. Teresa watched Dawson's departure with a mixture of admiration and shame. If a first officer could risk his career, what excuse did she have? She stepped forward, her voice steadier than she expected. "Captain Barrett," she said loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "I've verified Ms. Jackson's documentation twice now. Everything is in order. She has a valid ticket and has cleared security. There is no legitimate reason to prevent her from boarding when her group is called." Barrett's head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing. "Are you questioning my judgment regarding aircraft security, Ms. Gomez?" Teresa felt her heart hammering, but held her ground. "I'm stating facts regarding this passenger's documentation and boarding status, which fall under my area of responsibility." It was a careful response, technically within the boundaries of her role, but still a clear challenge to Barrett's overreach. The subtle defiance wasn't lost on Barrett, whose face flushed with anger. "I want security here now," he announced loudly. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention." Teresa felt sick. Barrett was escalating beyond what she could manage. If security removed Trinity from the gate based on the captain's assertion of a threat, the young woman might miss her flight entirely, regardless of the baselessness of the claim. Trinity, watching this unfold, realized the seriousness of her situation. Her carefully planned journey, the opportunity she had worked so hard for, was in jeopardy because one person had looked at her and decided she didn't belong. The injustice of it burned, but she kept her expression neutral, knowing that any display of emotion would only be used against her. She checked the time, 1:52 p.m. Boarding was proceeding. Her group would be called soon. Time was becoming her enemy. As Captain Barrett moved to the desk to call security directly, Trinity made a decision. She slipped her phone from her pocket and texted her mother, "Emergency at airport. Captain refusing to let me board. Says I'm suspicious. Gate C42. Flight 1127. Her hands shook as she typed, and she had to correct several typos before sending. The reality of the situation was finally breaking through her composed exterior. A single tear escaped, which she quickly wiped away. She would not give Barrett the satisfaction of seeing her break down. She knew her mother was in an important meeting, but if anyone could help her navigate this situation, it was Special Agent Maya Jackson. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up to authority? What would you do if you were in Trinity's position? Let us know in the comments below. Mom Trinity's voice cracked slightly when the call connected. "I need your help." The crowded gate area seemed to fade away as she focused entirely on the voice of her mother, her anchor in this storm of injustice. "There's a pilot here who says I'm suspicious. He's trying to stop me from boarding. He called security, and they're talking about removing me from the gate." Trinity's hand trembled as she held the phone. Her carefully maintained composure was finally beginning to crack under the pressure. A tear slipped down her cheek, which she quickly wiped away with her free hand. "I'm trying to stay calm, like you taught me." She continued, her voice barely above a whisper. But Mom, I'm scared. If I miss this flight, I'll miss the orientation. Everything we've worked for. She listened to her mother's calm, measured response, drawing strength from it. I'm at gate C42, flight 1127 to San Francisco. The captain's name is Barrett. There's a security officer named Ramirez here. She paused. Yes, I have all my documentation. Yes, I've shown it multiple times. Barrett watched impatiently, his foot tapping an aggressive rhythm on the terminal floor. Officer Ramirez maintained a respectful distance, giving Trinity space for her conversation, while staying close enough to monitor the situation. She wants to speak with you, Trinity said, looking up at Officer Ramirez. On speaker, Ramirez nodded, and Trinity switched the call to speaker mode, holding the phone between them. This is Officer Carlos Ramirez, Airport Security, he stated professionally. Officer Ramirez, this is Maya Jackson. Trinity's mother came the clear, authoritative voice from the phone. Something in her tone, a certain weight of command, made Ramirez stand slightly straighter. I understand there's a situation regarding my daughter's boarding status. Yes, ma'am. The captain has expressed security concerns, though I've not observed any behavior that would validate those concerns. And what specific allegations is the captain making? Ramirez glanced at Barrett, who was listening with narrowed eyes. The captain has cited suspicious pre-boarding behavior, but hasn't provided specific actionable concerns that would warrant security intervention. I see, Maya replied, her voice revealing nothing. And is my daughter's documentation in order? Yes, ma'am. Her boarding pass and ID have been verified multiple times. There was a brief pause before Maya continued. Officer Ramirez, I need you to listen carefully. I am Special Agent Maya Jackson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Chicago Field Office. My badge number is 7842. You can verify this information immediately with your supervisor or through official channels. Barrett's expression shifted from impatience to uncertainty. Trinity held the phone steady, though her heart was racing. My daughter is a minor traveling to a prestigious academic program, and she is being racially profiled by your airline's employee. This constitutes a potential civil rights violation under federal law. I am requesting that you take no action to remove her from the gate area until I arrive. I am approximately 30 minutes from O'Hare and will be there personally to resolve the situation. Ramirez's posture had changed subtly but significantly. The claim that Trinity's mother was an FBI agent could be verified easily enough, and if true, this situation had just become far more complicated. Ramirez had his own reasons for taking Maya's claim seriously. As the son of Mexican immigrants, he had witnessed firsthand how authority could be misused against those deemed suspicious based on appearance alone. His father, a respected doctor in Mexico, had been repeatedly pulled aside for random screenings when they traveled. Those experiences had shaped Ramirez's approach to security work, making him particularly sensitive to potential profiling. I understand, Agent Jackson, he replied formally. I'll remain with your daughter until you arrive. Barrett stepped forward, his face flushed. This is ridiculous. Anyone can claim to be FBI over the phone. We're not delaying a commercial flight based on an unverified phone call. Maya's voice remained perfectly steady. Captain, Barrett is it? This call is being recorded and I've already initiated contact with your airline's corporate security office. My credentials can be verified within minutes. I strongly advise you to take no further action against my daughter while that verification occurs. Barrett's confident demeanor wavered visibly. His eyes darted around the gate area, noting the numerous passengers recording the interaction on their phones. What had begun as a routine exercise of his authority was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. Furthermore, Maya continued, her voice taking on a steely edge. I'm authorizing Officer Ramirez to inform you that I've already spoken with Thomas Warren, Senior VP of Operations at American Legacy Airlines. He has assured me that Flight 1127 will not depart until this matter is resolved satisfactorily. This was a calculated bluff. Maya had indeed made contact with airline management, but not yet with Warren specifically. However, The mention of a high-ranking airline executive by name created exactly the effect she intended. Barrett's face paled slightly. Officer Ramirez Maya continued, "Please put your supervisor on the line." Ramirez radioed for his supervisor, briefly explaining the situation. Within moments, Senior Officer Patrick Donovan arrived at the gate. "This is Senior Officer Donovan," he announced after being briefed. "Senior Officer Donovan, I'm Special Agent Maya Jackson, FBI." Maya repeated. "My daughter Trinity Jackson is being prevented from boarding her flight due to unfounded accusations from the captain. I am requesting that you verify my credentials immediately and ensure that no action is taken against my daughter until I arrive at the airport in approximately 25 minutes. Donovan, a 20-year veteran of airport security, recognized the seriousness in her tone. "I'll need your badge number and field office for verification, Agent Jackson." Maya provided the information calmly. Donovan stepped away to make the verification call, leaving an increasingly uncomfortable Barrett standing with Ramirez and Trinity. "This changes nothing," Barrett insisted, though, with less conviction than before. "As captain, I have final authority over who boards my aircraft." From the phone, Maya's voice took on a new edge. The voice of someone who had faced down far more intimidating adversaries than an airline captain with an inflated sense of authority. "Captain Barrett, your authority as pilot in command is indeed significant under FAA regulations. However, that authority is not absolute and does not extend to making arbitrary decisions based on racial bias. Such actions constitute federal civil rights violations that fall squarely within FBI jurisdiction." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "Additionally, I should inform you that at least 7 passengers are currently live streaming this interaction. The hashtag #FlightDenied is already trending on Twitter with clips from your confrontation with my daughter. Whatever happens in the next 20 minutes will be very public and very permanent." This was another calculated statement. Maya couldn't know what was trending, but she correctly guessed that in a crowded airport gate with dozens of witnesses, social media documentation was inevitable. The mention of public exposure added another layer of pressure. Barrett's face paled slightly. "This has nothing to do with race. This is about security protocols. Then I look forward to reviewing exactly which protocols justified your actions today. I'll be examining them quite thoroughly, I assure you." The implications hung in the air. This was no longer a case of a captain bullying a teenage passenger. It was potentially a federal investigation into discriminatory practices with social media amplification. Senior Officer Donovan returned, his demeanor noticeably more deferential. "Agent Jackson, your credentials have been verified. We'll ensure your daughter remains at the gate until your arrival." "Thank you, Senior Officer Donovan. I appreciate your professionalism." Barrett looked between Donovan and the phone, the reality of his situation beginning to dawn on him. What had seemed like an easy exercise of authority was transforming into something that could potentially end his career. "This is an overreaction." He attempted, his voice losing its commanding edge. "I was simply following security protocols based on observed behaviors. I look forward to reviewing those specific behaviors and protocols in detail," Captain Maya replied. "Trinity, stay exactly where you are. I'm on my way." As the call ended, the dynamic at Gate C-42 had fundamentally shifted. Officer Ramirez stood protectively near Trinity, while Barrett retreated several steps, visibly reassessing his options. The audience of passengers, many of whom had delayed their own boarding to witness the confrontation, murmured among themselves. Several had their phones out recording the scene. Dr. Williams approached Trinity, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your mother sounds like quite a remarkable woman," she said with a smile of encouragement. Trinity nodded, a small smile breaking through her tension. "She is. She always says that knowing your rights and staying calm are your best weapons when facing injustice." "Smart advice," Dr. Williams agreed. "And it seems she practices what she preaches." Around them, a community of witnesses had formed. Strangers united by their recognition of wrongdoing and their determination to document it. The businessman who had been recording approached Officer Ramirez. "I've got the whole thing," he said quietly. From the moment the captain approached her, If you need a witness statement, I'm happy to provide one. Several other passengers nodded in agreement, offering their contact information and footage. What Barrett had initiated as an isolated act of discrimination had inadvertently created a coalition of witnesses committed to accountability. Trinity sat back in her chair, her composure intact despite the storm of emotions inside her. Her mother was coming. In all her 17 years, those words had never failed to bring her comfort, and today was no exception. She had witnessed her mother's transformation from concerned parent to federal agent. The shift in tone, the strategic deployment of authority, the calm certainty that came from knowing exactly how much power she wielded. Teresa Gomez approached Trinity speaking softly. "Are you okay? Can I get you some water while we wait?" Trinity nodded gratefully. "Water would be great, thank you." As Teresa left to fetch water, Dr. Williams took the seat beside Trinity. "That was quite something," she said with admiration. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She is," Trinity agreed. "She always tells me that in situations like this, the key is to stay calm and know your rights. Emotion can be used against you, but knowledge can't be." Williams nodded. "Wise advice. I'm Dr. Sandra Williams, by the way. I teach at Northwestern." "Nice to meet you, Dr. Williams. I'm Trinity Jackson." She gestured to her tablet. "I was reviewing some quantum mechanics for the program I'm attending. The Lawson Institute has this amazing laboratory with equipment I've only read about." Their conversation continued deliberately normal in the aftermath of the confrontation, a small act of defiance against Barrett's attempt to cast Trinity as something other than what she was, a brilliant young scientist on her way to an educational opportunity. Barrett had retreated to the gate desk, engaged in an intense, hushed conversation with someone on the phone, likely a superior at the airline who had just been contacted by FBI agent Maya Jackson. His face cycled through emotions: defensiveness, disbelief, growing concern. Across the terminal, the pieces were being set in motion for Maya Jackson's arrival. As Trinity waited, the situation at Gate C-42 had become a focal point in the busy airport, a moment when everyday discrimination had collided with unexpected accountability, creating ripples that would soon extend far beyond this gate, this airport, this day. Have you ever witnessed someone misuse their authority? How did you respond? Tell us in the comments below. Maya Jackson moved through the FBI's Chicago field office with swift purpose, her mind already mapping out multiple strategies as she headed toward the exit. "Rivera," she called to her colleague. "I need a vehicle with lights and sirens to O'Hare immediately." Special Agent Anthony Rivera looked up from his computer, instantly recognizing the steel in Maya's voice. "What's happened?" "My daughter is being illegally prevented from boarding her flight by a captain who's decided she looks suspicious. Airport security is involved. I need to get there before this escalates further." Rivera was on his feet instantly. "I'll drive you. We can take the SUV with the emergency package." Within minutes, they were racing toward O'Hare, lights flashing and siren clearing their path through Chicago's notorious traffic. Maya's face was a study in controlled emotion, the mother's anxiety carefully channeled through the agent's strategic focus. "Trinity's attending a quantum physics program at the Lawson Institute," Maya explained, as Rivera expertly maneuvered through traffic. "Full scholarship. She's been working toward this for years." Rivera nodded, understanding the subtext. Black excellence was often met with suspicion rather than celebration, a reality both agents had experienced personally throughout their careers. "Captain thinks she doesn't belong in that seat," Rivera surmised. "Exactly. And he's about to learn a very expensive lesson about making assumptions." As they sped toward the airport, Maya made a series of strategic calls, to airline executives, to her FBI colleagues in the Civil Rights Division, to the airport's security command. Each call placed another piece on the chessboard, creating a network of pressure points that would converge on Gate C-42. Meanwhile, at the gate, the standoff continued, intense suspension. Captain Barrett had retreated to the jetway entrance, engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly uncomfortable phone conversation with airline management. Officer Ramirez remained positioned protectively near Trinity, while Senior Officer Donovan coordinated with airline representatives who had hurried to the gate after receiving calls from corporate headquarters. Trinity sat quietly, her tablet now closed on her lap. The initial shock of the confrontation had faded, replaced by a calm certainty that justice was approaching in the form of her mother. She had witnessed Maya in professional mode before, at career days, at official functions, but had never been the direct beneficiary of her mother's formidable capabilities. Teresa Gomez approached Barrett, her earlier hesitation replaced by newfound confidence after witnessing the captain's authority begin to crumble. "Captain Barrett, we've received instructions from corporate to hold the flight. A representative from management is on their way to the gate." Barrett's face flushed with anger and growing anxiety. "This is completely unnecessary. I made a security assessment based on established protocols." "The FBI seems to disagree with your assessment," Teresa replied, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from her voice. Barrett's phone rang again, the fourth call in 15 minutes. His hand trembled slightly as he answered. "Barrett." The voice on the other end belonged to the chief pilot, his direct supervisor. "Richard, what the hell is going on? I've got the VP of Operations breathing down my neck about some discrimination incident at gate C-42. Sir, I identified a passenger displaying suspicious pre-boarding behavior." Barrett explained, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "I made a judgment call based on security protocols, and this passenger happens to be the teenage daughter of an FBI agent. What exactly did she do that was suspicious?" Barrett hesitated. When articulated aloud, his security concerns sounded increasingly flimsy. She was unusually focused on her electronic device, monitoring the boarding process while appearing disengaged. She had rehearsed sounding responses to security questions. The silence on the other end was deafening. When the chief pilot spoke again, his voice was measured but ice cold. "Richard, you're being removed from this flight. First Officer Dawson will take command. A replacement first officer is already en route." "Sir, this is not a discussion. Stand down immediately. Report to my office tomorrow at 0800. As Barrett disconnected the call, the full weight of his situation began to register. His career, built over decades of service, was potentially unraveling over what he had thought was a routine exercise of his authority. A flicker of doubt finally penetrated his certainty. Had he been wrong? Had his perception been clouded by something other than security concerns? The question made him deeply uncomfortable, challenging his self-image as a fair, security-minded professional. For a moment, memories from his military past surfaced. The rigid categorizations of us versus them, the training that taught him to identify threats based on patterns and profiles. He had carried that mindset into civilian aviation, seeing it as a continuation of his duty to protect. But what if that training, that mindset, had created blind spots he refused to acknowledge? The mental gymnastics required to maintain his position were becoming increasingly strenuous. But admitting bias would mean confronting uncomfortable truths about himself that he had spent a lifetime avoiding. It was easier to believe he was the victim of political correctness, of an overreaching federal agent of a society that no longer valued security protocols. At the airline's operations center, the situation had triggered a cascade of responses. Customer Service Director Elaine Howard had been pulled from a meeting after receiving calls from both corporate headquarters and the FBI. At 52, Howard had navigated enough PR crises to recognize when standard procedures needed to be abandoned in favor of damage control. "What exactly is happening at C-42?" she demanded as she entered the operations center. Captain Barrett attempted to deny boarding to a teenage passenger claiming security concerns, the duty manager explained. "Turns out the passenger is the daughter of an FBI agent who's now on her way to the gate. Social media is already picking it up. There are multiple videos circulating with the hashtag flight denied." Howard closed her eyes briefly. "Any actual security concerns? None that anyone can verify. Airport security is on scene and hasn't found any basis for Barrett's claims. Has the passenger been antagonistic or non-compliant? According to the gate agent's report, she's been completely cooperative. Multiple witnesses describe Barrett's behavior as unprofessional and potentially discriminatory. Howard made her decision. Issue a ground hold for the flight. Mechanical delay. Get a customer service team to the gate immediately, and find me Barrett's performance file. I want to know if there's a pattern here. The duty manager hesitated. Ma'am, there's something else you should know. This isn't the first incident with Captain Barrett. There are at least 3 documented cases in the past year where passengers, all minorities, were subjected to additional scrutiny based on his security concerns. None resulted in actual security findings. Howard's expression hardened. Why wasn't this pattern flagged before now? The incidents were handled at the local level. No one connected the dots. Well, someone's connecting them now, and it's the FBI. Get me everything we have on Barrett now. As these wheels turned behind the scenes, First Officer Dawson received a call informing him he would be taking command of Flight 127. Despite the circumstances, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His act of defiance, standing up to Barrett's discriminatory behavior, had not resulted in career suicide as he had feared. Instead, it had placed him in command. He approached Trinity, who was still sitting with Dr. Williams. "Ms. Jackson," he said quietly, "I wanted to let you know that I'll be the captain for your flight to San Francisco today. Captain Barrett has been removed from duty." Trinity looked up surprised. "Thank you for telling me. I also want to apologize for not intervening sooner. I should have spoken up the first time I saw what was happening." Trinity considered his words. "You did speak up eventually. That counts for something." Dawson nodded, accepting both the grace and the implicit criticism in her response. "Your boarding pass will be honored. I'll make sure of it." As he walked away, Trinity turned to Dr. Williams. "That was unexpected." "Not really," Dr. Williams replied with a small smile. "People with consciences can only stay silent for so long." Meanwhile, social media was amplifying the incident beyond the confines of Gate C-42. One passenger's video had been shared over 5,000 times in just 20 minutes. Another had been picked up by a popular Twitter account focusing on racial justice issues. Comments were flooding in, another case of #flying while black, waiting for the airline's non-apology apology. "This captain needs to be fired." Props to the passengers who stood up for her. But the digital conversation wasn't one-sided. Other comments defended Barrett. "We don't know what the captain saw that raised concerns. Better safe than sorry when it comes to airline security." Why is everyone so quick to cry racism? Maybe there was a legitimate issue. The incident was sparking debates about security versus profiling authority versus accountability in real time across social media platforms. Barrett, now standing alone near the jetway entrance, watched his phone fill with notifications. Texts from colleagues who had seen the videos, a message from his wife asking what was happening, an email from the pilots' union representative. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, and he was still struggling to understand why. In his mind, he had simply been doing his job, protecting his aircraft, following security protocols. The idea that his actions might have been driven by bias rather than legitimate security concerns was one he would not entertain. To accept that would mean confronting uncomfortable truths about himself that he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Teresa approached him again, her expression now professionally neutral. "Captain Barrett, your replacement first officer has arrived. You're requested to vacate the gate area." Barrett stared at her, recognizing the role reversal. The gate agent now giving orders to the captain. "This is a mistake," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I was following protocol." Teresa met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps, but protocols can be used to mask bias. I've worked with you for 3 years, Captain Barrett. This isn't the first time you've targeted a passenger who didn't fit your idea of who belongs where." Her words struck with precision, cutting through his remaining defenses. Before he could respond, a movement at the entrance to the gate area caught his attention. A woman had appeared, moving with purposeful strides toward the center of the commotion. She was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, her bearing radiating quiet authority. Barrett knew instantly who she was. Special Agent Maya Jackson, Trinity's mother. His stomach dropped as he watched her approach. This was no longer a theoretical threat on the phone. This was a federal agent on a mission, and he was directly in her path. Trinity spotted her mother at the same moment. Relief washed over her face, followed by pride. She stood up, her posture straightening unconsciously as Maya approached. The gate area had grown silent, passengers and airline staff alike, watching the new arrival with intense interest. It was as if a shift in atmospheric pressure had occurred. The air suddenly charged with expectation. Maya had arrived, and with her came the moment of reckoning that Barrett had set in motion, with his first unfounded accusation against a brilliant young woman whose only crime was existing in a space where he hadn't expected to see her. Would justice be served? Keep watching as this powerful confrontation reaches its climax. Maya Jackson's entrance into Gate C-42 created an immediate shift in the atmosphere. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to taking command of tense situations, her FBI credentials momentarily visible before being returned to her pocket. She didn't need theatrical flourishes or raised voices. Her presence alone reset the power dynamics in the crowded gate area. Trinity watched her mother approach, a complex mix of emotions washing over her: relief at the arrival of her protector, pride in witnessing her mother's professional authority, and a lingering echo of the hurt and indignation from Barrett's unfounded accusations. Maya reached Trinity first, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. A brief, tender moment of connection before addressing the situation at large. That touch conveyed everything Trinity needed to know. I'm here now. You're safe. This will be resolved. Are you okay? Maya asked quietly. Trinity nodded. I'm okay, Mom. Maya studied her daughter's face, assessing her emotional state with a mother's keen eye. Satisfied that Trinity was indeed holding up well, she turned her attention to the others in the gate area. Her gaze swept over the scene. Officer Ramirez and Senior Officer Donovan standing at attention. Teresa watching nervously, passengers recording with phones, and finally Barrett standing alone by the jetway entrance. I'm Special Agent Maya Jackson, FBI, she announced, her voice carrying without being raised. She displayed her credentials briefly, allowing Senior Officer Donovan to verify them. Agent Jackson. Donovan acknowledged. We've been maintaining the situation as requested. I appreciate that, Officer Donovan. Maya's tone was professional but warm, acknowledging cooperation while maintaining authority. Barrett watched her approach with growing dread. The composed, confident federal agent before him was a far cry from the angry parent he had imagined and dismissed. This woman wielded not just emotional outrage, but institutional power. Power that could potentially end his career. Captain Barrett. Maya addressed him directly, her tone deceptively conversational. I understand you've determined my daughter represents a security threat to your aircraft. I'd like you to explain the specific behaviors you observed that led to this conclusion. The question hung in the air, a seemingly simple request that Barrett suddenly found impossible to answer satisfactorily. His mouth felt dry as he searched for words that wouldn't incriminate him further. Agent Jackson, as pilot in command, I'm responsible for assessing security risks based on established protocols and behavioral indicators. I'm not questioning your authority, Captain. I'm asking for the specific behaviors you observed. As an FBI agent specializing in counterterrorism, I'm quite familiar with legitimate security threat indicators. The challenge was clear. Substantiate your claims or admit they were baseless. Barrett's response was tellingly vague. There were several concerning behaviors, including unusual focus on electronic devices during boarding announcements, monitoring of security procedures, and rehearsed-sounding responses to standard questions. Maya's expression didn't change, but her voice took on a new edge. Captain Barrett, are you suggesting that a 17-year-old honor student using a tablet while waiting for her flight constitutes suspicious behavior? The absurdity of Barrett's indicators hung in the air, exposed by Maya's precise questioning. Around them, Passengers and airline staff watched the exchange with rapt attention, many recording discreetly on their phones. When viewed as part of a pattern, Barrett began. What pattern specifically? Maya interrupted, her voice remaining level, but acquiring a dangerous precision. The pattern of being a young black woman in a space where you didn't expect to see her. The direct confrontation of the racial elements silenced Barrett momentarily. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound, like a fish suddenly removed from water. This has nothing to do with race. He finally managed the denial, sounding hollow even to his own ears. Interesting, Maya replied, her tone making it clear she found it anything but. Because I've reviewed over a dozen similar incidents reported at this airport in the past year, and the statistical pattern suggests otherwise. But we can explore that aspect more thoroughly during the formal investigation. First Officer Dawson stepped forward, now wearing his captain's stripes. Agent Jackson, I was present for the initial assessment of your daughter, and I want to state for the record that I observed no behaviors that would constitute legitimate security concerns. Maya acknowledged Dawson with a nod. Thank you, Captain Dawson. I appreciate your professional integrity. Elaine Howard, the customer service director who had hurried to the gate after receiving urgent calls from corporate headquarters, approached cautiously. Agent Jackson, I'm Elaine Howard from American Legacy Airlines. On behalf of our company, I want to extend our sincere apologies for this situation. We're taking this matter extremely seriously. I appreciate that, Ms. Howard, Maya replied. Here's what's going to happen now. My daughter will be boarding this flight as ticketed. I'll be accompanying her to San Francisco to ensure she arrives at her program on time. I'll require a seat on this flight. Howard nodded immediately. Of course. We'll arrange that right away. We can accommodate you in first class beside your daughter. Additionally, Maya continued, I'll be filing a formal complaint regarding Captain Barrett's conduct, which will detail potential violations of both airline policy and federal civil rights laws. I expect full cooperation with that investigation. You'll have our complete cooperation, Howard assured her, shooting a pointed glance at Barrett. Maya turned back to Barrett. Captain, are you planning to continue as pilot of this flight? The question hung in the air, both a challenge and an opportunity. Barrett could insist on his right to command the aircraft, but doing so would mean spending the next 4 hours knowing an FBI agent was sitting in the cabin, documenting his every announcement and decision. Before Barrett could respond, his phone rang again. He answered, listened briefly, then lowered the phone. His posture seemed to collapse inward, the rigid authority that had defined him minutes ago now visibly crumbling. I've been instructed to stand down from this flight, he stated, his voice strained. Captain Dawson will be taking command with a replacement first officer en route. Maya held his gaze for a moment longer, letting him feel the full weight of his situation before turning away. In that dismissal was a clear message. You are no longer relevant to this situation. She addressed the gate agent next. Ms. Gomez, I understand you were placed in a difficult position earlier. I'd appreciate if you could arrange our boarding now. Teresa nodded, relieved that the situation was resolving. Of course, Agent Jackson. We'll begin boarding your group immediately. As Barrett was escorted away by airline officials, Maya turned her attention back to Trinity. The professional mask softened, revealing the mother beneath the agent. Looks like we're going to San Francisco together, she said with a small smile. Hope you don't mind your mom tagging along. Trinity's eyes shone with a mixture of relief and admiration. Not this time, she replied. Dr. Williams approached, extending her hand to Maya. Dr. Sandra Williams, I was a witness to what happened here. Your daughter handled herself with remarkable poise throughout this entire ordeal. You should be very proud. I am, Maya replied, squeezing Trinity's shoulder gently. Every day. As boarding for Flight 1127 resumed with Maya and Trinity receiving priority boarding, the atmosphere in the gate area had transformed completely. What had begun as an ugly display of unchecked authority had become a powerful lesson in accountability. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation exchanged contact information, offering to provide statements if needed. Several approached Trinity to express their support and admiration. Teresa Gomez, the gate agent who had been caught in the middle of Barrett's overreach, approached Maya before they boarded. Agent Jackson. I want to apologize for my role in this situation. I should have pushed back harder against Captain Barrett's demands. Maya regarded her thoughtfully. You were placed in a difficult position, Ms. Gomez. I understand the power dynamics at play. But remember, sometimes standing up against injustice requires risk. Teresa nodded, absorbing the gentle rebuke. I won't forget that lesson. Thank you. As the announcement came for final boarding, the passengers who had supported Trinity erupted in spontaneous applause. It wasn't just for Trinity and Maya, but for justice itself, for the rare and satisfying sight of accountability being served in real time. As Maya and Trinity settled into their first-class seats, the events of the past hour began to process through Trinity's mind. The emotional roller coaster, from excitement about her program, to confusion at being targeted, to fear of missing her opportunity, to relief at her mother's arrival, to vindication as Barrett was removed from the flight, left her feeling simultaneously drained and energized. Mom, she said quietly, as the boarding continued around them. How do you do it? Stay so calm when facing someone like that. Maya considered the question carefully. It's partly training. The Bureau teaches us to control our emotions in high-stress situations. But mostly, it's about recognizing the power dynamics. People like Barrett expect emotional reactions. They're prepared for anger tears, frustration. What they're not prepared for is calm, reasoned resistance backed by knowledge of your rights. Trinity nodded thoughtfully. He kept saying I was acting suspicious, but I was just existing. That's often enough, Maya replied, a note of sadness in her voice. But remember what happened today. Yes, you faced discrimination, but you also saw how quickly things changed when the right pressure was applied. Barrett thought his authority was absolute. He discovered otherwise. The replacement first officer arrived, hurrying down the aisle to the cockpit. Acting Captain Dawson made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We've resolved our maintenance issue and will be departing shortly. Our flight time to San Francisco today is 4 hours and 15 minutes. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Trinity gazed out the window at the busy tarmac of O'Hare. The quantum physics program awaited her in San Francisco, a step toward her dreams that had nearly been derailed by one man's prejudice. I'm proud of you, Maya said softly. Not everyone would have maintained their composure in that situation. Trinity turned from the window. I had a good teacher. The two women shared a smile. Mother and daughter, agent and student. Both warriors in their own way against the injustices that remained embedded in the systems around them. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, Trinity felt a weight lifting as well. Captain Barrett had looked at her and seen a threat. But she knew the truth. She wasn't a threat to safety. She was a threat to outdated systems, to entrenched biases, to the comfortable certainty of those who believed they could determine who belonged where. And as Chicago fell away beneath them, Trinity Jackson returned to her quantum equations, preparing to take her rightful place among the scientific minds awaiting her arrival. Have you ever witnessed a moment where justice was delivered in real time? Share your experience in the comments below. The next morning, Trinity stood at the entrance to the Lawson Institute, gazing up at the modernist glass and steel structure that housed some of the most advanced quantum research facilities in the country. Despite the emotional turbulence of the previous day, she had arrived in time for the evening orientation, where she had met Dr. Emilia Rodriguez and the 11 other students selected for the prestigious program. Maya approached, handing Trinity a coffee in a paper cup. Ready for your first full day? Trinity nodded, adjusting her NASA hoodie, the same one she had worn during the confrontation with Barrett. She had considered changing into something else, but had decided against it. The hoodie was part of her identity, a symbol of her aspirations to push beyond boundaries and explore the unknown, whether in quantum physics or in challenging the social barriers that tried to contain her. I'm meeting with the airline representatives this afternoon, Maya said, checking her watch. They've asked for a full statement regarding yesterday's incident. Their legal team is taking this very seriously. Will Captain Barrett lose his job? Trinity asked, her voice neutral. She had spent much of the flight to San Francisco processing her feelings about the confrontation, working through anger and hurt, to arrive at a place of calm reflection. That's not up to me, Maya replied. But based on my conversation with their corporate security team, this wasn't an isolated incident. There's a pattern of similar complaints against him. Trinity considered this. So he's done this before, just not to anyone with an FBI agent for a mother. Maya nodded, the implication hanging between them. How many other passengers lacking Trinity's resources and connections had suffered similar treatment without recourse? The system worked for you yesterday because I had the leverage to make it work, Maya acknowledged. That's not justice. It's privilege. Real justice would mean the system working equally well for everyone, regardless of who their parents are or what credentials they have. Trinity sipped her coffee thoughtfully. So what happens now? Now, Maya said with a small smile, you focus on quantum physics and changing the world through science. And I focus on ensuring that what happened to you helps create positive change for others. As Trinity entered the Institute for her first full day of the program, Maya watched her go with a mixture of pride and lingering concern. The incident at O'Hare had been resolved, but its echoes would continue to resonate. Through the airline's investigation, through Barrett's future, and through Trinity's understanding of the world she was navigating. Maya's phone rang. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Catherine Morrison calling for an update. Maya, how's Trinity doing? She's good, Catherine. Resilient. Focused on her program. And you? Maya considered the question. Processing. Using my anger productively. She paused, then added more softly, and questioning myself. Questioning Catherine sounded surprised. You handled the situation perfectly, maybe professionally, but as a mother. Maya's voice trailed off. I've spent years teaching Trinity how to navigate discrimination, how to prove herself in spaces that weren't designed for her. But yesterday, watching her go through that, it made me wonder if I've prepared her for the right world. What do you mean? I've taught her to be twice as good, to never show emotion, to always stay composed in the face of injustice. But is that the world I want for her? One where she has to be perfect, just to be treated with basic dignity? That's a heavy question, Maya. It is. And I don't have an answer yet. But I know I want her to live in a world where she can just be brilliant and passionate about physics without also having to be a warrior against prejudice. Catherine's voice softened. That's why your work matters, Maya. Not just the counter-terrorism operations, but the smaller battles too. Like the one you fought yesterday. As she ended the call, Maya watched the students gathering inside the Institute's glass-walled atrium. Trinity was already engaged in animated conversation with another young woman, her hands moving expressively as she explained something complex and technical. The resilience of her daughter never ceased to amaze Maya. In the face of injustice, Trinity had maintained her dignity, her focus, and her determination to occupy spaces where people like her were traditionally underrepresented. It was a strength Maya recognized, the same strength that had carried her through the FBI Academy as one of only 3 black women in her class, through field assignments where her authority was constantly questioned, through a career spent proving herself repeatedly in environments designed for people who didn't look like her. Back in Chicago, the consequences of the previous day's events were already unfolding. Captain Richard Barrett sat in a sterile conference room at American Legacy Airlines administrative offices, facing a panel that included representatives from human resources, legal, and flight operations. Captain Barrett began, the chief pilot. We've reviewed the initial reports from yesterday's incident at Gate C-42, including statements from First Officer Dawson Gate Agent Teresa Gomez and multiple passengers. We've also received formal notification from the FBI that Agent Maya Jackson will be filing a complaint alleging civil rights violations. Barrett stared straight ahead, his face a mask of controlled neutrality. I was following established security protocols based on observed behaviors. This has been wildly mischaracterized as a racial incident. The legal representative, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, leaned forward. Captain Barrett, This isn't the first complaint of this nature against you. We've identified 7 previous incidents in the past 18 months where passengers, predominantly minorities, were subjected to additional scrutiny or denied boarding based on your security concerns. In none of those cases was any legitimate threat identified. Barrett's facade cracked slightly. He hadn't realized anyone was tracking these incidents, connecting them into a pattern that now seemed damning when viewed collectively. That just proves the effectiveness of the screening. Barrett insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Potential threats were deterred. The HR director exchanged glances with the chief pilot. "Captain, we're placing you on administrative leave, effective immediately pending a full investigation. Your flight privileges are suspended, and you'll be required to surrender your company credentials before leaving today." Barrett's facade finally cracked, anger flashing across his features. "This is absurd. 22 years of service and you're throwing me under the bus because some FBI agent played the race card. That's enough." Barrett, the chief pilot, cut in sharply. "Your record is far from exemplary. We've received multiple concerns from first officers about your command style and decision-making. This incident has simply brought those concerns into sharper focus." As Barrett was escorted from the building, his future with the airline hanging by an increasingly thin thread, a complex mix of emotions churned within him. Anger dominated. At the airline for not backing him at Maya Jackson, for interfering at the passengers who had recorded the incident. But beneath the anger, a small seed of doubt had taken root. What if he had been wrong? What if his judgment had been clouded by bias? He refused to acknowledge. The thought was so uncomfortable that he pushed it away, retreating to the familiar territory of self-justification. He had been following protocol. He had been protecting his aircraft. The world had gone mad with political correctness. These thoughts provided temporary comfort, but they couldn't entirely silence the growing dissonance between his self-image as a fair, security-minded professional and the mounting evidence that his actions had been driven by something else entirely. As he drove home alone, memories from his military days surfaced. The intense security briefings that had taught him to be constantly vigilant, to trust his instincts to act decisively when he spotted potential threats. The Detroit incident 7 years ago had reinforced those instincts, confirming his belief that vigilance was the only thing standing between safety and disaster. But what if those same instincts, honed in the high-stakes context of military operations and terrorist threats, had become distorted when applied to everyday civilian life? What if the very training that had made him an effective military officer had created blind spots in how he perceived certain people? The questions were uncomfortable, challenging the foundations of his professional identity. It was easier to blame others than to confront the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, he had been wrong. Meanwhile, First Officer Michael Dawson was completing his return flight to Chicago as acting captain. The previous day's events had forced him to confront his own complicity in a system that enabled discrimination. Dawson had spent years observing Barrett's behavior without meaningfully challenging it, prioritizing his career advancement over speaking out against injustice. The moment when Agent Jackson had asked about specific behaviors, and Barrett had failed to provide any legitimate concerns, had crystallized something for Dawson. He had been enabling a bully by remaining silent. Upon landing in Chicago, Dawson was met by the airline's internal investigative team. His statement was thorough and unflinching, detailing not only the incident with Trinity, but also several previous occasions where Barrett had targeted passengers based on race, religion, or appearance, rather than any legitimate security concern. "Why didn't you report these incidents before the investigator asked?" Dawson's answer was honest in its uncomfortable simplicity. "Because it was easier not to. Because I told myself it wasn't my problem. Because I was protecting my career at the expense of doing what was right." The admission was both personal reckoning and professional turning point. By the end of the day, Dawson had been asked to help develop new training protocols for flight crews regarding bias recognition and intervention strategies. At the same time, Teresa Gomez was participating in her own debriefing with airline management. Unlike Dawson, She had attempted some resistance to Barrett's demands, but had ultimately capitulated to his authority. "I knew it was wrong," she explained to Elaine Howard. "I could see it was baseless profiling. But he's a captain, and I'm a gate agent." The power imbalance felt insurmountable. Howard nodded with understanding. "That's exactly the dynamic we need to address. Captains have significant authority, but it isn't unlimited. We need clear protocols for gate agents to escalate concerns when they believe a captain's requests are inappropriate." Teresa leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I'd like to be part of developing those protocols. What happened to Trinity Jackson shouldn't happen to anyone else." By the end of the week, Teresa had been offered a new position, leading customer service training with a special focus on recognizing and preventing discrimination. Her experience at Gate C-42 would become a case study in the airline's revised training materials. In San Francisco, Trinity immersed herself in the quantum physics program. Her brilliant mind focused on theoretical problems far more complex than airport discrimination. Yet the experience had changed her in subtle ways, sharpening her awareness of the barriers that remained, deepening her appreciation for her mother's strength, and reinforcing her determination to excel in spaces where people like her were still too often viewed as interlopers. During a break between laboratory sessions, Trinity found herself speaking with Dr. Rodriguez about the incident. "Your mother is quite remarkable," Dr. Rodriguez observed. "The way she handled that situation speaks volumes about where you get your composure." Trinity smiled. "Mom always taught me that the best response to people who don't think you belong somewhere is to excel so thoroughly that your presence becomes undeniable." Dr. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "That's true, but it's also a heavy burden to place on individuals. Excellence shouldn't be a prerequisite for fair treatment." "I know," Trinity agreed. "Mom says the same thing. She says she fights so that someday I won't have to be exceptional, just to be treated with basic dignity." As the first week of the program drew to a close, Maya prepared to return to Chicago. Standing outside Trinity's dormitory, mother and daughter embraced. "I'm so proud of you," Maya said softly. "Not just for your brilliant mind, but for your courage and grace under pressure." Trinity held her mother tightly. "Thank you for coming when I needed you, for showing me what strength looks like." "That strength is in you too," Maya replied. "It always has been." As Maya boarded her flight back to Chicago, on a different airline by deliberate choice, she reflected on the events that had brought her to San Francisco. The incident at O'Hare had been painful for Trinity, but it had also revealed something important. The systems of power and privilege that enabled discrimination could be challenged effectively when confronted with equal or greater authority. The real work Maya knew was ensuring that such authority was accessible to everyone, not just those with badges or titles or connections. It was work she had been doing throughout her career, and work that Trinity would continue in her own way, breaking barriers in science just as Maya had broken them in law enforcement. The plane lifted off, carrying Maya back to her team and her ongoing cases. Behind her, Trinity delved deeper into the quantum mysteries that had captivated her mind since childhood. Two black women, mother and daughter, occupying spaces where others had tried to tell them they didn't belong, and proving through excellence and persistence that those spaces were exactly where they were meant to be. Has someone ever stood up for you when you faced discrimination? Or have you been the one to stand up for someone else? Share your story in the comments below. 3 months after the incident at O'Hare, Captain Richard Barrett sat across from his attorney in a small conference room reviewing the terms of his separation agreement with American Legacy Airlines. The internal investigation had uncovered a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning years, not just toward passengers, but also toward crew members and ground staff. "This is the best outcome we could hope for under the circumstances," his attorney explained. "You'll receive 6 months severance in exchange for your resignation and a non-disclosure agreement regarding the specific findings of the investigation." Barrett stared at this document, his expression bitter. 22 years of service, and this is how it ends. Because of one entitled teenager and her FBI mother. The attorney sighed. "Richard, you need to understand something. This isn't about one incident. The airline compiled evidence of 17 separate incidents over the past 3 years, where you targeted passengers based on race, religion, or appearance. Multiple first officers and flight attendants provided statements describing a pattern of biased decision-making. That's their interpretation, Barrett insisted. The FAA doesn't share your interpretation, the attorney countered. Their review of your pilot's license is ongoing, but the preliminary findings suggest a lack of professional judgment, consistent with air carrier operations. You're facing a potential suspension or revocation. Barrett's face paled. Without his license, he wasn't just unemployable at American Legacy. He was unemployable as a pilot anywhere. Sign the agreement, Richard. Take the severance. Start planning for a different future. With a shaking hand, Barrett signed the document that formally ended his aviation career. The man who had once commanded multi-million-dollar aircraft with hundreds of lives in his hands would never again sit in a cockpit. His authority so carelessly wielded against Trinity Jackson had been permanently revoked. As Barrett walked to his car alone in the corporate parking garage, the full weight of his situation finally hit him. His identity had been built around being Captain Barrett, an authority figure, a decision-maker, someone whose judgment was trusted implicitly. That identity was gone, stripped away in the aftermath of a confrontation that had exposed not just his bias, but his fundamental misunderstanding of the power he had wielded. Sitting in his car, memories from his military service surfaced. The rigorous training that had instilled in him an unbending adherence to hierarchy and protocol. He had been taught to make snap judgments, to trust his instincts, to identify potential threats based on patterns. Those same qualities that had made him an effective military officer had become liabilities in commercial aviation, where context and nuance mattered more than rigid adherence to perceived patterns. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider a different perspective. What if the girl had simply been a student waiting for her flight? What if his instinct had been wrong? What if what he had interpreted as suspicious behavior was nothing more than a young black woman existing in a space where he hadn't expected to see her? The question led to others more uncomfortable still. Had he applied the same level of scrutiny to all passengers, or had he unconsciously held some to a different standard? The evidence suggested the latter, though, admitting it felt like a betrayal of his self-image as a fair, unbiased professional. As he started his car, a notification lit up his phone. Another news article about the incident, this one featuring an interview with First Officer Dawson, now permanently promoted to captain. The headline read, "Pilot who stood up to discrimination takes command." Barrett closed the notification without reading further. The narrative had been written, and in that narrative, he was the villain, the embodiment of prejudice and abuse of power. There was no space in that story for nuance, for the possibility that he had genuinely believed he was protecting his aircraft, that he had been following protocols as he understood them. Yet even as he clung to these justifications, a small voice inside him whispered an uncomfortable truth. If Trinity Jackson had been a white teenager, would he have seen her as suspicious? The question haunted him because deep down, he suspected he knew the answer. Meanwhile, American Legacy Airlines was implementing a comprehensive overhaul of its training and reporting procedures. The incident at Gate C-42 had exposed significant gaps in the airline's approach to bias prevention and passenger rights. Captain Michael Dawson had become a key figure in the reform efforts. His first-hand account of Barrett's behavior, combined with his willingness to acknowledge his own failure to intervene earlier, made him a credible advocate for change. The cockpit hierarchy is essential for flight safety, Dawson explained to a room full of airline executives. But we've allowed that necessary hierarchy to extend into areas where it doesn't belong. A captain's authority regarding aircraft operation doesn't give them the right to engage in discriminatory behavior toward passengers or crew. The airline's new training program, developed with input from civil rights organizations and diversity consultants, focused on recognizing bias, understanding the limits of authority, and establishing clear protocols for reporting concerns. Every employee, from executives to baggage handlers, would be required to complete the training. Teresa Gomez, newly promoted to lead customer service trainer, had developed a module specifically for gate agents, teaching them how to navigate the complex power dynamics between captain security personnel and ground staff. When I failed to effectively advocate for Trinity Jackson, I was thinking about my job security, Teresa told her trainees. What I should have been thinking about was my responsibility to ensure fair treatment for every passenger. The changes at American Legacy weren't limited to training. The airline had implemented a new reporting system, allowing employees to flag potential discrimination without fear of retaliation. An independent review board, including representatives from passenger advocacy groups, now examined all incidents where passengers were denied boarding based on subjective security concerns. The story had also caught the attention of regulatory agencies. The Department of Transportation had launched a broader investigation into discriminatory practices across the airline industry, using the Trinity Jackson incident as a case study. Congressional hearings on bias in air travel were scheduled for the following month, with Maya Jackson invited to testify. For Trinity, Jackson's life had moved forward at the accelerated pace of a brilliant young mind. Her performance at the Lawson Institute had exceeded even the high expectations set by her application. Dr. Rodriguez had taken a special interest in Trinity's work, mentoring her through a research project on quantum entanglement that was now being prepared for publication in a prestigious scientific journal. I've never seen a student grasp these concepts so intuitively, Dr. Rodriguez told Maya during a phone call. Trinity has a natural gift for visualizing quantum interactions that most physicists develop only after years of study. Trinity's experience at O'Hare, rather than derailing her focus, had somehow sharpened it. The incident had reinforced her understanding that excellence was still her most powerful weapon against those who would question her belonging. It wasn't fair that such a burden existed, but Trinity had chosen to transform that burden into fuel for her ambitions. During a video call with her mother, Trinity shared exciting news. Mom, Dr. Rodriguez nominated me for the National Young Scientist Award. Only 5 students nationwide are selected each year. Maya's face lit up with pride. That's incredible, Trinity. When will you find out if you've been selected? In about 2 months. The winner gets a $50,000 scholarship and an internship at CERN next summer. CERN, as in Switzerland. Maya's eyebrows raised. That's a long way from Chicago. Trinity grinned. I promise not to call the FBI if I get profiled at the Swiss airport. They both laughed, the shared joke a way of processing what had happened, acknowledging its seriousness while refusing to let it define Trinity's story. Maya had her own news to share. The Civil Rights Division has expanded their investigation into discriminatory practices in the airline industry. What happened to you was unfortunately not an isolated incident. They're reviewing 5 major carriers now, looking at patterns of bias in security procedures. Trinity nodded thoughtfully. So something good might come from what happened. It already has, Maya assured her. American Legacy's new training program is being held up as a model for the industry. Sometimes it takes a high-profile incident to create momentum for change that benefits everyone. Officer Carlos Ramirez had also experienced positive developments in the aftermath of the incident. His decision to question Barrett's demands, rather than automatically enforcing them, had been noted by his supervisors. Ramirez had recently been promoted to a training position, where he now taught new security officers about balancing security protocols with passenger rights. The most important lesson I try to impart, Ramirez explained to his trainees, is that true security isn't about power or control. It's about creating an environment where legitimate threats can be identified without trampling on people's dignity or rights. His own experience as the son of immigrants who had faced profiling had informed his approach to security work. The incident with Trinity had reinforced his conviction that security and respect were not mutually exclusive. In fact, they were interdependent. Back in Chicago, Maya Jackson continued her work with the FBI, balancing counterterrorism operations with her new role as a consultant to the Civil Rights Division's airline investigation. The incident with Trinity had renewed Maya's commitment to addressing systemic inequities, not just through her official duties, but through mentorship and community engagement as well. She had begun speaking at high schools in predominantly minority neighborhoods, sharing her journey from a working-class family to the FBI. Her message was consistent: excellence matters, but so does systemic change. "I don't want you to have to be exceptional just to be treated with basic dignity," she told a group of students at her alma mater. "I want you to be exceptional because that's who you choose to be, not because it's the price of admission to spaces where others enter freely." As Trinity's first semester at college approached, she had been accepted early to MIT with a full scholarship. The ripples from the O'Hare incident continued to spread. The videos recorded by passengers had found their way online, becoming a case study in both discrimination and effective intervention. Dr. Williams, the Northwestern professor who had witnessed the confrontation, had incorporated the incident into her sociology course on power dynamics. "What we witnessed at Gate C-42," she told her students, "was a textbook example of authority being used as a shield for bias, and of how quickly that authority can crumble when confronted with legitimate counter-authority." 6 months after the incident, Maya received an unexpected email from American Legacy Airlines. The message was brief but significant. The airline was implementing a scholarship program for underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation named the Trinity Jackson Initiative. They requested Maya and Trinity's permission to use the name. When Maya shared the news with Trinity, her daughter's response was characteristically thoughtful. "What do you think, Mom? Is it just PR or something meaningful?" Maya considered the question. Probably both. But even PR-driven initiatives can create real opportunities. 20 students a year will receive full tuition scholarships to flight school or aviation engineering programs. That's 20 young people who might not otherwise have had the chance. Trinity nodded. "Then let them use my name. Maybe the next generation of pilots will look a bit more like the passengers they serve." For Richard Barrett, the consequences had been life-altering. The FAA had ultimately suspended his pilot's license for 1 year with reinstatement contingent upon completing extensive retraining and psychological evaluation. His professional reputation was irreparably damaged. Commercial airlines wouldn't touch him, and even private aviation companies were reluctant to associate with a pilot whose name had become synonymous with discrimination. He had found work as a dispatcher for a regional cargo company, still in aviation, but far removed from the prestige and authority of the captain's chair. The salary was less than a third of what he had earned as a commercial pilot. His marriage, already strained by years of ego and absences, had not survived the additional pressure of financial downturn and public disgrace. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Barrett's perspective began to shift. The anger that had initially consumed him gradually gave way to something more complex, a reluctant recognition that perhaps his actions had been influenced by biases he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. His military training had taught him to make snap judgments based on perceived patterns, but it hadn't taught him to question whether those patterns themselves might be flawed. The more he reflected, the more uncomfortable the truth became. Would he have reacted the same way to a white teenager studying on a tablet? The honest answer was no, and that realization was the beginning of a painful but necessary reckoning. For Trinity and Maya Jackson, the incident had strengthened an already powerful bond. They had always been close, but facing discrimination together and overcoming it through combined strength had created a new dimension to their relationship. Trinity saw her mother not just as a parent, but as a warrior and advocate. Maya saw in Trinity not just her beloved daughter, but a young woman of extraordinary resilience and grace under pressure. As summer turned to fall and Trinity prepared for her first semester at MIT, mother and daughter sat together on their back porch in Chicago, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Are you nervous about MIT?" Maya asked. Trinity considered the question. "A little. It's a big transition. But after everything that's happened, I feel like I can handle whatever comes my way." "You can," Maya assured her. "You've already proven that." Trinity leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. Thank you for showing me how to stand up for myself without losing myself. Maya wrapped an arm around her daughter, holding her close. That's the real challenge, isn't it? Fighting the battles without letting them change who you are. Refusing to let other people's limitations become your own. As darkness fell over Chicago, mother and daughter remained on the porch. Two black women who had faced down injustice and emerged stronger. Not because the world had made it easy, but because they had made each other strong. Has an incident of discrimination in your life led to positive change? We'd love to hear your story in the comments. 1 year to the day after the incident at O'Hare Trinity, Jackson stood at the podium in MIT's Grand Lecture Hall, preparing to present her research on quantum entanglement to an audience that included faculty fellow students and a special guest. Her mother Maya seated proudly in the front row. Trinity had completed her first semester with perfect grades, establishing herself as a rising star in the physics department, despite being several years younger than most of her classmates. The quantum research she had begun at the Lawson Institute had evolved into a groundbreaking paper published in the prestigious journal Nature Physics, an almost unheard-of achievement for an undergraduate, let alone a freshman. As she prepared to begin her presentation, Trinity glanced down at her NASA hoodie, the same one she had worn that day at Gate C-42. She wore it now as a deliberate choice, a symbol of her journey from a girl who was told she didn't belong to a scientist, whose work was changing her field. The hoodie represented her determination to explore beyond boundaries both in quantum physics and in the social spaces that had once tried to exclude her. Good afternoon, she began, her voice clear and confident. My research explores the phenomenon of quantum entanglement, specifically how particles that become entangled remain connected regardless of distance, with actions performed on one particle affecting the other instantaneously. As Trinity delved into complex equations and theoretical models, Maya watched with a mixture of pride and amazement. The technical content of the presentation was far beyond her understanding, but the poise and intellectual command her daughter displayed were unmistakable. This was Trinity in her element, brilliant, focused, and belonging absolutely in this space of advanced scientific inquiry. The contrast with the young woman who had been made to feel like an intruder at Gate C-42 couldn't have been more striking. After the presentation, as faculty members surrounded Trinity with questions and congratulations, Maya stood to the side, giving her daughter room to shine. A familiar face approached, Dr. Emilia Rodriguez from the Lawson Institute, who had flown in specifically for Trinity's presentation. Agent Jackson, Dr. Rodriguez, greeted her warmly. Your daughter continues to exceed every expectation. She has a truly exceptional mind. Thank you, Maya replied, though I can take no credit for her scientific brilliance. That's all Trinity. Perhaps Dr. Rodriguez agreed, but her resilience, her poise under pressure, those qualities I suspect she learned from you. She hesitated, then added, Trinity told me about what happened at the airport last year, how you handled it. That experience could have derailed a less determined young woman. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Trinity has always been determined, but that incident taught her something important, that even in spaces where others try to make you feel you don't belong, you can stand your ground with dignity. Later that evening, as Maya and Trinity shared dinner at a small restaurant near campus, the conversation turned to the changes that had unfolded in the year since the confrontation with Captain Barrett. I saw that American Legacy's new anti-bias training program won an industry award, Trinity mentioned. Teresa Gomez was interviewed about it on the news. Maya nodded. The airline has actually become a leader in addressing these issues. Sometimes it takes a crisis to create meaningful change. And Barrett, Trinity asked quietly. It was the first time in months she had mentioned his name. Last I heard, he's still working as a dispatcher for that cargo company. His license suspension ends next month, but commercial flying is likely out of reach permanently. Trinity was silent for a moment, contemplating the man who had tried to prevent her from boarding that flight to San Francisco. I don't feel satisfaction at his downfall, she finally said. Just a sense that actions have consequences. That's because you have compassion even for those who didn't show it to you, Maya replied. That speaks to your character. As they walked back to Trinity's dormitory through the MIT campus, they were surprised to see a familiar figure waiting on a bench near the entrance. Richard Barrett. He stood as they approached, his posture, uncertain, his face showing the strain of the past year. The arrogant captain who had confronted Trinity at O'Hare was gone, replaced by a man who looked older, humbled by circumstances. "Ms. Jackson," he said, addressing Trinity directly. I know this is unexpected. I've been trying to work up the courage to reach out for months." Trinity stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Maya appeared behind her, instantly alert and protective. "Mr. Barrett." Maya said, her voice neutral but watchful. "This is unexpected." Barrett nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know. I probably shouldn't have come, but I felt I needed to." He took a deep breath. "I came to apologize. Not for publicity, not for my career. That's gone. But because after a year of reflection, I finally understand what I did." Trinity and Maya exchanged glances, both wary but willing to listen. "What I did to you was wrong," Barrett continued, his voice unsteady. "I looked at you and saw a threat because of my own biases. Biases I refused to acknowledge for most of my life. I convinced myself I was following security protocols, but the truth is, I was following something much uglier." The admission hung in the air between them, raw, painful, but undeniably honest. It took losing everything, my career, my marriage, my self-image, to finally see it. Barrett continued, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that what happened changed me. It forced me to confront truths about myself that I'd spent a lifetime avoiding." Trinity regarded him thoughtfully. "Thank you for saying that. It can't have been easy to come here." "It wasn't," Barrett admitted, "but it's nothing compared to what I put you through." Maya's protective instincts remained on high alert, but she recognized the genuine remorse in Barrett's demeanor. "What will you do now?" she asked. Barrett gave a small, sad smile. "I've started working with a civil rights organization, sharing my story as a cautionary tale, teaching pilots and other authority figures about how bias can distort judgment. It's not much, but it's something." After Barrett left Trinity, and Maya sat in silence for a moment, processing the unexpected encounter. "Do you think he's genuinely changed?" Trinity asked. Maya considered the question carefully. "I think he's trying to. Real change is hard, especially when it requires confronting deeply held beliefs about yourself. But the fact that he came here with no expectation of forgiveness or restoration, that suggests something genuine." Trinity nodded slowly. "It's strange. For months I've thought of him as this villain in my story. But he's just a man who made terrible choices based on beliefs he never questioned." "That's often the case," Maya replied. "The systems of inequality we fight aren't usually maintained by mustache-twirling villains, but by ordinary people who never examine their biases or the power they wield." As the moon rose over the MIT campus, Trinity and Maya walked arm in arm toward the dormitory. The incident at O'Hare had been painful, but it had led to unexpected outcomes. Industry-wide changes in airline policies, a scholarship program for underrepresented students, and even the beginning of a journey of self-reflection for the man who had initiated the confrontation. Most importantly, it had reinforced for Trinity that her path forward, in quantum physics and in life, would not be defined by those who tried to exclude her, but by her own brilliance, determination, and the unwavering support of those who believed in her. The next morning, after Maya had departed, Trinity sat alone in her dormitory room, reflecting on the year that had passed since the confrontation at Gate C-42. What had begun as a traumatic encounter had transformed into something unexpected, a catalyst for change not just in airline policies or Barrett's life, but in her own understanding of justice, power, and resilience. She opened her laptop and began typing an email to Dr. Rodriguez outlining a new idea for community outreach, a program that would bring young girls from underrepresented groups to MIT for a weekend of science immersion. She would call it the right seat, a reference to the space she had fought to occupy both literally and figuratively. As Trinity worked, The quantum equations on her desk seemed to take on new meaning. Just as particles could remain connected across vast distances, so too could a single act of justice create ripples that transformed lives far beyond the original encounter. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If it moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And remember, sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or retaliation, but calm, informed resistance, backed by the knowledge that you belong exactly where you are.